A lot of the information that we're going to be covering today is really covered in my book, The Strategic Project Leader, Mastering Service-Based Project Leadership. I'd like to first start off with a very simple quote from Tom Peters. He says, "Distinguished project work is the future of work for the simple reason that more than 90% of white-collar jobs are in jeopardy today. They're in the process of being transformed beyond identification or completely eliminated." Now, we know that Tom Peters says some outlandish things from time to time, and I don't really think the question here is whether it's 90% or 80% or 50%. I think the question for us is, particularly if we're in project management and for PMPs, the question really is are we at risk? Are we at risk as professionals to this phenomenon that's happening? So I'd like you to consider that question. I think the answer to that question somewhat lies in this slide. Attitude matters. Our attitudes matter in terms of what we bring into our workplace environment every day. The basic idea is this. Attitudes drive our behaviors, and our behaviors in turn drive the attitudes of workers around us, our team members, our sponsors, those key stakeholders that we're working with. Their attitudes obviously then drive their behaviors, which then in turn drive other people's attitudes. And you can see it's basically a vicious cycle. And it could be a very positive opportunity for us as project managers, depending upon the attitudes that we bring to our job, or it could be obviously a very negative impact on our project organization and our project environment. On the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see a picture, and if you recognize it, it's actually a picture of the Space Shuttle Columbia from back in February of 2003 as it was entering back over the United States. And in the lower right-hand corner, you can actually begin to see the wing of the Space Shuttle Columbia starting to come apart. This was actually taken by a Air Force satellite photo, after the tragic accident of the space shuttle disintegrating upon re-entry. The reason why this photo, I think, is important is because there's a behavioral scientist, his name is Richard Jarvin, and he studied NASA for 10 years in the 1990s leading up to the 2003 accident of the Space Shuttle Columbia. And he summarized his findings in terms of looking at not just internal within NASA, but also its contractors that were supporting NASA. And he summarized it with this quote: "If we worry about every little thing, we'll never fly." The idea is that those attitudes drove behaviors of workers, project teams, sub-project teams, program managers, and so on. Those attitudes impacted their behaviors, and those behaviors have consequences. Now, certainly this is a dramatic example of the consequences of this, but we have to recognize that our attitudes drive our behaviors, and they have impact, they have consequences on our projects that we try to manage. Another one of my favorite quotes from Tom Peters is this: "The whole discipline and art of project management is going to be the essence of management training, operational excellence, and value added." He says, "People skills will increasingly determine an organization's success. Teams will voluntarily come together to solve complex problems using global resources, essentially replacing the modern-day corporation." And what he goes on to say, he says, project managers, people like you and me who are working on the forefront of these of the change that we're trying to drive in organizations. He says project managers with a knack for memorizing the PMBOK will be the glue. Now, of course, if you're reading the slide, it doesn't say that. I hope you got a little chuckle out of that. But what he really does say is that project managers with a knack for people skills will be the glue. So I think the question we have to ask ourselves as professional project managers and people who consider, whether you have a PMP or not, we take the job seriously in terms of driving organizational change in our projects and in the organizations that we work with or consult with. I think one of the things we have to ask ourselves is, are we really focused on the structure of the PMO, or are we focused on the entrepreneurship of competency? Are we focused on creating the best templates to standardize our processes, or are we focused on a level of creativity? Are we focused on creating the lowest price for a basic service of our project management efforts, or are we focused on a level of professionalism? Now, I'll be the first to tell you that I think PMO and project structure provide a tremendous value to organizations. However, when it starts to impede upon project managers and team members, thinking critically of the work that needs to be done and taking an active leadership role in these projects, then it becomes a problem. When we simply stop thinking and just simply fill out the templates, we've created a problem for us in our organizations that is ultimately going to inhibit ourselves from being successful in driving change. So what is the solution to this? Where do we go from here? I think the place to start is very simple. We look at what a project is, but we have to look at it from a customer perspective. We know that a project is unique, has a need or problem statement, hasn't been done before, requires resources, has a customer and sponsor, has expected benefits, and it entails risks. These are all characteristics, right, that if we've been in project management for any amount of time, we're well aware of these things, and they're covered in any Project Management 101 book. But when we look at this from a customer perspective, right, it's unique. It hasn't been done before. Okay? Just think about those two statements. There's a need from a customer. It's unique, and it hasn't been done before. What does this require? I believe this requires a level of advice and recommendations from the project team, from the project manager, from the project leader to the customer. Think about the last time you were the customer or sponsor of a project. Maybe you were renovating your kitchen. Maybe you were settling an estate for a family member, something that you hadn't done before. The bottom line is it's unique, and you're relying on expertise of someone to help you through this process. You're busy with your life. You're busy with your families. You don't have the time to dedicate 100% of your efforts to this project, nor do you have the expertise to do it. So you're relying as a customer on a level of advice and recommendations from others. I think that when we look at our internal projects in our organizations, our stakeholders, our customers who may be running large departments, 200-300 people, dealing with lots of issues, personnel issues, never mind the things that they're dealing with outside of work, when they get involved in a project and they have a project manager show up to a meeting and run a meeting, they're looking for a level of advice and recommendations from that manager to lead the project. We also can look at this idea that the customer is expecting a level of benefits, right? If you're remodeling your kitchen, you're expecting it to come out a certain way. I remember when I remodeled my kitchen, I knew that the pressure was on, and certainly the idea was that it was unique. It hadn't been done before, and we were expecting certain benefits to come out of it, and guess what? It entailed risk. If I screwed up this project, I knew that it was going to have consequences. In other words, my wife would be very unhappy with this kitchen, and I would be unhappy with it as well. And it would take years to undo and redo and a lot of money to undo. So there was risk involved in trying to achieve these level of